The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the faint cry of a newborn. The pale morning light slipped through the hospital curtains, gently touching the face of the young woman lying on the bed. She looked exhausted, her hair slightly damp, her hands still trembling from the long hours of pain she had just endured. But despite everything, there was a small, peaceful smile on her lips as she looked at the tiny baby resting beside her. This was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life. She slowly reached out and touched the baby's cheek with her finger. The little one moved slightly, making a soft sound, and her eyes filled with tears. Not of sadness, but of relief, of love, of something pure that she had held on to even through all the struggles. She had waited for this moment for so long, but something felt off. The room felt colder than it should have, not because of the air, but because of the silence. No laughter, no warm voices, no excitement from the family that was supposed to welcome this child into the world. She turned her head slightly toward the door, expecting it to open any second. She thought maybe her husband would walk in, smiling, holding flowers, apologizing for being late. But instead, the door opened slowly, and 3 people walked in. Her heart sank. It was not the moment she had imagined. Her mother-in-law walked in first, her face stiff, her eyes cold. Behind her came the father-in-law, quiet but firm, and then her husband, who didn't even look at her. The young woman felt something tighten inside her chest. "Why you all look so serious?" she asked softly, her voice still weak. No one answered her right away. Her mother-in-law stepped closer to bed, glancing briefly at the baby before looking away, as if it didn't matter much. That small gesture hurt more than words. "We don't have much time," the older woman said in a flat tone. The young woman frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Her husband shifted uncomfortably near the door, still not meeting her eyes. His silence was louder than anything else in the room. Then the father-in-law cleared his throat and placed a thin file on the table beside her bed. "Sign these," he said. She blinked, confused. "What is this?" Her mother-in-law answered without hesitation. "Divorce papers." For a moment, it felt like time stopped. The young woman stared at the file, not moving. She thought she had heard wrong. Maybe she was still tired. Maybe this was some kind of bad dream. "Divorce?" she repeated slowly. Her husband finally spoke, but his voice was low and uncertain. "It's better this way." Better. The word echoed in her mind. She let out a soft breath and looked at him carefully, searching his face for something, regret, hesitation, anything, but found nothing except avoidance. "Better for who?" she asked quietly. No one answered. The baby beside her made a small sound, almost as if reacting to the tension in the room. She gently placed her hand over the child, instinctively protective. Her mother-in-law crossed her arms. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. You know very well this marriage was a mistake." A mistake. The young woman felt the words settle heavily in her chest, but her face remained calm. "We accepted you before," the older woman continued, "but things have changed. Our family has a reputation to maintain. We can't afford to be tied to someone like you. Someone like you." The meaning was clear. She came from a simple background. No wealth, no powerful connections. She had always known her husband's family looked down on her, but she believed that love would be enough. She had been wrong. And now, the father-in-law added, "There are better opportunities for our son, important alliances, important families." The message was clear without being said directly. They had found someone better, someone richer, someone more useful. The young woman lowered her eyes to the baby for a moment, her expression softening. She gently adjusted the blanket around the child, as if creating a small shield from everything happening around them. "And the baby?" she asked after a pause. Her mother-in-law gave a short, dismissive look. "We will decide what's best." That was the moment something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. The young woman slowly looked up again, and there was something different in her eyes now. The sadness was still there, but it was no longer weak. It had turned into something steady, controlled. "You will decide," she repeated calmly. "Yes," the older woman said firmly. "Our family name matters. We will not let this child grow up under the wrong influence." The words were sharp, But the young woman didn't react the way they expected. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. Instead, she simply nodded once, as if she had just understood something important. Her husband shifted again, clearly uncomfortable now. "Just sign the papers," he muttered. "Let's not drag this out." She looked at him for a long moment. This was the man she had trusted, the man she had chosen, the man she had believed would stand by her no matter what. But now, standing there, he felt like a stranger. "Is this what you want?" she asked softly. He hesitated just for a second, but then he looked away again. "Yes." That one word closed the door on everything they had shared. The young woman took a slow breath and reached for the file. Her movements were careful, almost gentle, as if she were handling something fragile. She opened it and glanced through the pages. Legal terms, cold words, a clean ending to something that once felt full of life. Without saying anything else, she picked up the pen. Her mother-in-law watched closely, almost impatient. "Good," she said. "At least you understand your place." The young woman didn't respond. She simply signed. Her hand didn't shake. Her expression didn't break. When she finished, she closed the file and placed it back on the table. "It's done," she said quietly. The room fell silent again. For a brief moment, even her in-laws seemed slightly surprised. They had expected resistance, tears, begging, but they got none of it. Her calmness felt unsettling. Her husband picked up the file quickly, almost as if he wanted to leave before something changed. "Take care of yourself," he said awkwardly, though it sounded more like something he felt he had to say, not something he truly meant. She didn't reply. She just looked at her baby. One by one, they turned and walked out of the room. The door closed behind them with a soft click. And just like that, it was over. The young woman sat in silence for a while. The weight of everything slowly settled around her, but she didn't let it crush her. Instead, she leaned closer to her child and whispered softly, "It's okay?" Her voice was gentle, but there was strength hidden inside it. "You and I will be just fine." She carefully lifted the baby into her arms, holding the small body close to her chest. The warmth, the softness, the quiet breathing, it grounded her. Outside the window, the morning light had grown brighter. A new day had begun. After a while, there was a light knock on the door. A nurse stepped in with a polite smile, unaware of what had just happened. "Your discharge papers are ready," she said kindly. "Do you have someone come and pick you up?" The young woman looked toward the window for a brief moment. Then she turned back and gave a small, calm smile. "Yes," she said, "I do." But there was something in her eyes that the nurse didn't quite understand. It wasn't relief. It wasn't dependence. It was certainty. And as she gently held her child, there was a quiet sense that this story was far from over. The hallway outside the hospital room was quiet, but not empty. A few nurses walked past, speaking in low voices. Somewhere in the distance, a phone rang. Life continued as usual, as if nothing important had just happened inside that small room. Inside, she sat still for a few more minutes after the nurse left. Her baby was sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the sudden changes in the world around them. She gently rocked back and forth, not out of worry, but out of habit, as if her body already knew what to do. Her eyes moved slowly around the room. Just hours ago, she had imagined this place filled with warmth. She had imagined laughter, maybe a few happy tears, soft conversations about the future. She had imagined her husband standing beside her, holding their child with pride. Instead, she had been handed divorce papers. She let out a slow breath, but there was no anger in it, no loud reaction. Just a quiet release of something that had already been breaking for a long time. Deep down, she wasn't completely surprised. There had been signs, small things at first, a change in tone, fewer calls, short answers, her husband becoming distant, distracted, his family becoming more openly critical, less careful with their words. She had noticed everything, but she had chosen to stay patient. She had believed things would get better. She had told herself that every family has its problems, that love takes time, that understanding grows slowly. Now, sitting alone in that room, she realized something clearly. She had been trying to hold together something that had already fallen apart. She looked down at her baby again and smiled softly. "At least I still have you," she whispered. The baby moved slightly, as if responding to her voice. Carefully, she placed the child back in the small hospital bed and stood up slowly. Her body still felt weak, but her movements were steady. She walked to the small cabinet near the wall and opened it. Inside was a simple bag with her belongings. Nothing expensive, nothing eye-catching, just a few clothes, a phone, and a thin wallet. To anyone else, it looked like the life of someone with very little, but that was only one side of the truth. She picked up her phone and held it in her hand for a moment, staring at the blank screen. Her thumb hovered over it, as if she was deciding something important. Then, without hesitation, she unlocked it and scrolled through her contacts. There was one name she hadn't touched in a long time. She paused for just a second, then tapped it. The phone rang only once. "Hello?" A calm, professional voice answered immediately. "It's me," she said quietly. There was a brief silence on the other end. Not confusion, but recognition. "Ma'am," the voice replied, now more alert. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "It's time." That was all she needed to say. "I understand," the voice responded without asking any more questions. "We'll be there shortly." She ended the call and placed the phone back into her bag. Her expression didn't change much, but something inside her had shifted. Not sadness, not relief, control. She walked back to the bed and gently picked up her baby again, wrapping the small blanket more securely around the tiny body. "You're going to see a different world now," she murmured softly. Minutes passed, then 10, then 15. The hospital remained calm, but outside, something unusual began to happen. At first, it was just one car, then another, and then several more. Sleek black vehicles began pulling up quietly near the hospital entrance, one after another. They didn't make noise. They didn't attract attention, with flashing lights. But their presence was impossible to ignore. People nearby started to notice. Security guards straightened up. Nurses exchanged curious glances. This was not something that happened every day. Back in her room, she stood near the window, looking down at the entrance. Her face remained calm, as if she had expected this all along. A soft knock came at the door again, but this time it wasn't a nurse. "Come in," she said. The door opened slowly, and a man in a clean, dark suit stepped inside. He looked respectful, composed, and completely different from anyone who had entered that room earlier. Behind him stood two more people, equally professional. The man lowered his head slightly. "We're here to take you home." She gave a small nod. "Everything is ready?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "Just as you instructed." He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He simply followed her lead. For a moment, the room felt different. Not tense like before, but filled with quiet respect. She adjusted her hold on the baby and walked toward the door. As she stepped into the hallway, a few nurses looked at her with surprise. Not because of her, but because of the people walking behind her. The same woman who had seemed alone just moments ago was clearly not alone at all. They moved calmly through the hospital, not rushing, not drawing attention, but still impossible to ignore. Outside, one of the car doors was already open. She paused just before stepping in and looked back once at the building. There was no sadness in her eyes now, only clarity. Then she got into the car. The door closed gently, and within seconds, the entire line of vehicles began to move. Inside the car, everything was quiet and comfortable. The seats were soft, the air cool, the space calm. Her baby slept peacefully in her arms, unaware of the change in surroundings. The man sitting across from her spoke again, carefully. "Would you like to go directly home, or—" She looked out the window for a moment, watching the city pass by. "No," she said. "Take me to the main residence." He nodded, understood. There were no more questions. As the car moved forward, her thoughts drifted, not to what she had lost, but to what she had left behind by choice. She remembered the day she had decided to live a simple life. She had everything back then: wealth, influence, a powerful name. But none of it had felt real. None of it had felt personal. She wanted something honest, Something that didn't come with expectations or hidden intentions. That was why she had hidden her identity. That was why she had chosen a quiet life. And that was how she had met her husband. At the time, it seemed different, kind, genuine, someone who didn't care about status. Or at least, that was what she believed. She had given him her trust without conditions. She had built a life with him from the ground up, never once revealing who she truly was. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to be loved for who she was, not for what she had. She closed her eyes briefly. That chapter was over now. When she opened them again, the car was turning through large gates, tall, secure, and guarded, the kind of place that spoke of power, without needing to say a word. As the gates closed behind them, the world she had hidden for so long finally stood in front of her again. And this time, she wasn't going to hide anymore. The large gates closed slowly behind a line of black cars, sealing off the outside world. Inside, everything felt calm, organized, and controlled. Tall trees lined the driveway, and the sound of the city faded away as the cars moved deeper into the private estate. She sat quietly in the back seat, holding her baby close. The child stirred for a moment, then settled again, as if sensing the safety in the air. When the car finally came to a stop, a group of staff members were already waiting near the entrance. They stood in a neat line, dressed formally, their posture straight, their expressions respectful. The door opened for her. She stepped out slowly, careful with every movement. Her body was still recovering, but there was no sign of weakness in the way she carried herself. The moment her feet touched the ground, every person present lowered their heads slightly. "Welcome back," one of them said. She gave a small nod, not making a big show of it. "It's good to be back," she replied softly. There was no excitement in her voice, no pride, just calm acceptance. She walked inside, and the doors opened wide as if they had been waiting for her all along. The space inside was large but not loud. Everything was elegant, clean, and peaceful. Soft lighting filled the halls, and the air smelled fresh. It was a completely different world from the small apartment she had been living in, but she didn't stop to admire it. She had seen it all before. "Prepare a quiet room," she said gently. "Somewhere comfortable for the baby." "It's already ready," a woman replied quickly. "We made sure everything was prepared in advance." She nodded again. Within minutes, she was guided into a warm, peaceful room. Soft curtains, a comfortable bed, and a small crib placed near the window. Everything was simple, but perfect. She carefully laid the baby down and adjusted the blanket. For a few seconds, she just stood there, watching the gentle rise and fall of the child's breathing. Then she turned around. "Call the team," she said calmly. "We need to begin." The tone of her voice had changed. It was still soft, still controlled, but now it carried authority. "Yes," the staff member replied immediately. Within an hour, she was seated in a private meeting room. The difference was clear. Not long ago, she had been sitting in a hospital bed, being handed divorce papers like she meant nothing. Now, she sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by professionals who waited for her instructions. A large screen lit up in front of her, displaying reports, charts, and updates. One of the senior executives began speaking. "During your absence, operations have remained stable. However, there have been some unusual developments in the market." She listened quietly, her hands resting calmly on the table. "Several companies have started pulling out of agreements with one particular group," he continued. "It seems sudden and unplanned." She didn't react immediately. "Which group?" she asked. The screen changed, showing a familiar name. It was her ex-husband's family business. The room remained silent for a moment. She studied the screen carefully, her expression unreadable. "They've lost 3 major partnerships in the past week," the executive added, "and more are likely to follow." Another voice joined in. "We've also noticed that investors are becoming cautious around them. Their reputation seems to be weakening." She leaned back slightly in her chair. "Did we take any direct action?" she asked. "No," the executive replied. "Not yet." She nodded slowly. "Good," she said. "Then we won't rush." There was no anger in her tone, no desire for revenge, just careful thinking. "Keep observing," she continued. Don't interfere unless necessary. The team nodded, taking notes. The meeting continued for some time, covering different areas: business operations, investments, future plans. She listened to everything with focus, asking questions when needed, making decisions without hesitation. It was clear that this was not new to her. This was her world, and she knew exactly how to handle it. After the meeting ended, the room slowly emptied. One by one, the staff members left, leaving her alone in the quiet space. She sat there for a few moments, looking at the now blank screen. Her thoughts drifted again, but this time not to the past in a painful way, just understanding. She remembered the early days of her marriage, the small apartment, simple meals, quiet evenings. At that time, she had felt something real, or at least, she had believed it was real. She had hidden everything: her background, her family, her wealth, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She wanted a life where she could just be herself. No titles, no expectations, no pressure, just a normal life. But normal life had come with its own kind of truth. People showed who they really were when things got difficult. And now, everything was clear. She stood up slowly and walked toward the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in soft colors. Behind her, a soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she said. The same man from earlier stepped inside. "There's something you should see," he said carefully. She turned slightly. "What is it?" He placed a tablet on the table and stepped back. She walked over and picked it up. On the screen were news updates, business headlines, and right there, in clear words, was the name of her ex-husband's family company again. Unexpected losses, partnership withdrawals, rising concerns. She read quietly, scrolling through the updates. "They're trying to manage the situation," the man said, "but it's not going well." She handed the tablet back without much reaction. "This is just beginning," she said. Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't soft either. It was steady. "Should we step in?" he asked. She shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "Let things unfold." He nodded, understood. As he turned to leave, she added one more thing. "Make sure everything is stable on our side. No unnecessary tension." Of course. When the door closed, she let out a slow breath. Then she left the room and returned to the quiet space where her baby was resting. The child was awake now, moving gently, eyes half open. She walked over and picked the baby up, holding the small body close. For a moment, everything else faded away. No business, no past, no conflict, just a small, peaceful life in her arms. "You won't have to go through what I did," she whispered softly. Her voice carried a quiet promise. Outside, the world was already beginning to shift. The same people who had once looked down on her were now slowly losing the ground beneath their feet. But inside that room, she didn't smile about it. She didn't celebrate. Because for her, this wasn't about revenge. It was about moving forward. And this time, she was doing it without hiding who she truly was. Days passed, but the calm inside her home did not match the growing tension outside. Every morning, she followed a simple routine. She woke up early, checked on her baby, and spent quiet time just holding the child close. Those moments were the most important part of her day. Nothing else came before that. After that, she would step into her work. Meetings, reports, decisions, everything moved smoothly under her control. But in another part of the city, things were falling apart. Her ex-husband's family was no longer as confident as they had been in the hospital room. The same people who once spoke with pride and certainty were now dealing with problems they could not easily fix. Business partners started pulling away one by one. Calls went unanswered. Meetings were canceled without clear reasons. At first, they thought it was just bad timing, a temporary issue. But then the pattern became too clear to ignore. This was not random. Something bigger was happening. In their large house, the atmosphere had changed completely. The usual noise of busy conversations had turned into quiet discussions behind closed doors. Worry had replaced confidence. The father-in-law sat at his desk, looking over documents again and again, hoping to find a solution he might have missed. "This doesn't make sense," he said, his voice tense. "These companies trusted us for years. Why would they suddenly walk away?" No one had a clear answer. The mother-in-law paced slowly across the room, her face no longer calm. "There has to be a reason," she insisted. "People don't just leave without something behind it." Her son stood nearby, silent, his mind clearly somewhere else. For days now, he had been distracted, not just because of the business, but because of her. He couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at him in the hospital. Not angry, not broken, just done. That look stayed with him. "We should reach out," the mother-in-law said suddenly. "Find out who's behind this." "We've tried," the father-in-law replied. "No one is giving us clear answers." That was the most frustrating part. No direct attack. No clear enemy. Just doors closing quietly. Later that evening, one of their trusted contacts finally agreed to meet. It was a short meeting, but it changed everything. The man sat across from them, hesitant, as if he wasn't sure how much he should say. "You didn't hear this from me," he began carefully. The room went still. "What is it?" the father-in-law asked. The man leaned forward slightly. "The reason people are pulling away, it's not random. We already know that," the mother-in-law said impatiently. "Just tell us who it is." The man paused for a moment, then spoke quietly. "It's connected to someone much bigger." The father-in-law frowned. "Who?" The man hesitated again, then finally said, "The woman your son just divorced." Silence filled the room. For a second, no one reacted. Then the mother-in-law let out a short laugh. "That's impossible," she said. "She has nothing." The man didn't laugh. Instead, he reached into his bag and placed a file on the table. "Take a look," he said. The father-in-law opened it slowly. As his eyes moved across the pages, his expression changed. Confusion, then disbelief, then something closer to shock. "This," he muttered, "this can't be right." "What is it?" the mother-in-law asked, stepping closer. He turned the file toward her. The room grew quiet again as she read. Names of companies, ownership details, financial records, and right at the center of it all, her, the same woman they had just pushed out of their family, the same woman they had called not suitable, the same woman they had handed divorce papers to just hours after she gave birth. "No," the mother-in-law whispered. "This doesn't make sense." But the documents were clear. There was no mistake. Their son finally stepped forward and took the file into his own hands. He read every page slowly. His heart began to race. Memories started coming back. Small moments that didn't make sense before. The way she never seemed worried about money. The way she stayed calm in difficult situations. The quiet confidence she carried. Even when others spoke down to her, it had all been there. He just never saw it. Or maybe he never tried to. "She knew," he said quietly. Both his parents looked at him. "She knew who she was," he continued, "and she still stayed with us." The weight of that truth hit harder than anything else. She had chosen them, and they had rejected her. The room felt heavier now. "What do we do?" the mother-in-law asked, her voice no longer strong. No one answered immediately, because for the first time, they were not in control. Back at her residence, she was sitting in the garden, holding her baby as the evening air moved gently around them. The sky was turning soft shades of orange and pink. It was peaceful, a kind of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. A staff member approached carefully. "They found out," he said quietly. She didn't look surprised. "It was only a matter of time," she replied. "They may try to contact you." She nodded slightly. "Let them," she said. There was no fear in her voice, no hesitation, just readiness. The next morning, the call finally came. Her phone rang once. She looked at the screen. It was him. For a moment, she simply watched it. Then she answered. "Hello," she said calmly. There was a pause on the other end, as if he didn't expect her to pick up. I need to talk to you," he said. His voice sounded different now, less certain. "About what?" she asked. Another pause. Then, About everything. She looked out the window, her expression unchanged. There's nothing left to talk about, she said. That's not true, he replied quickly. I didn't know. If I had known. She cut him off gently. That's exactly the point, she said. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it was clear. You didn't know, and you didn't try to know. Silence again. I made a mistake, he admitted. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. Yes, she said softly. You did. But we can fix this, he continued. We can start over. She shook her head, even though he couldn't see it. No, she replied. You can't rebuild something you never truly valued. Her words were simple, but they carried truth. I'm sorry, he said. This time it sounded real, but it came too late. She looked down at her baby, who was sleeping peacefully. I believe you, she said quietly. That surprised him. You do, he asked. Yes, she replied. But that doesn't change anything. And with that, she ended the call. No anger, no raised voice, just a clear ending. Outside, the world was still shifting. But inside, she had already moved on. And this time, there was no going back. Time moved forward, slowly but steadily, and with it, everything began to settle into a new rhythm. Her days were no longer filled with uncertainty. There were no harsh words waiting for her, no silent judgments, no need to prove her worth to anyone. The life she was living now felt calm, clear, and fully her own. Every morning began the same way. She would wake up before the sun fully rose, the soft light just starting to touch the edges of the sky. The first thing she always did was check on her baby. Sometimes the child would still be asleep, breathing gently, wrapped in warmth. Other times, small eyes would already be open, quietly observing the world. Those moments became her favorite part of the day. She would lift the baby into her arms, holding the small body close, feeling a kind of peace that no amount of wealth or power could replace. You're growing fast, she would whisper with a soft smile. And it was true. Day by day, the baby became more aware, more responsive. Small movements turned into little reactions. Soft sounds slowly began to form into early attempts at laughter. The house, once quiet and still, now carried gentle life. After spending time with her child, she would move into her work. But unlike before, work no longer felt like something she had to balance carefully with her personal life. Now, everything was in harmony. She had control over her time. Her meetings were direct and efficient. Her decisions were respected, without question. The people around her trusted her not just because of her position, but because of the way she handled everything, with calm thinking and quiet confidence. Her company continued to grow stronger. New partnerships formed. New opportunities opened. And with each passing week, her influence became even more solid. But she didn't chase attention. She didn't show off her success. She simply focused on building something stable for herself and for her child. Outside her world, things had taken a very different direction. Her ex-husband's family was no longer in the position they once held. The steady loss of business had forced them to step back. The confidence they once carried had been replaced by caution. They were not completely destroyed, but they were no longer powerful. And for the first time, they understood what it meant to lose control. There were moments when they thought about reaching out again. Moments when regret felt heavy enough to push them to act. But they never did, because deep down, they knew something had changed in a way that could not be undone. Back in her home, she stood one afternoon by the large window, holding her baby as sunlight filled the room. The child was awake, quietly looking around, small fingers moving gently. She smiled. Your world will be different, she said softly. There was no sadness in her voice, only certainty. A staff member approached from behind, careful not to disturb a moment. There's a request, he said politely. She turned slightly. What kind of request? They would like to arrange a meeting, he explained. Not personal, business-related. She understood immediately who they were. For a brief moment, she thought about it. Not emotionally, not personally, just practically. Decline it, she said calmly. Yes, he replied. There was no hesitation in her decision. She had already given them their chance, long before any of this happened, and they had made their choice. Now, She was making hers. Later that evening, she sat in the garden again, the same place where she had spent many quiet moments since returning. The air was soft and the world felt still. Her baby rested comfortably in her arms, slowly drifting to sleep. She looked up at the sky, watching as the colors changed. There was something peaceful about endings, not because they were easy, but because they made space for something new. She thought back to the hospital room, the cold voices, the file placed beside her, the word divorce spoken so casually. At the time, it could have broken her. It could have left her feeling lost. But instead, it had done something else. It had set her free. Free from expectations that were never fair. Free from people who never truly valued her. Free to live without hiding. She looked down at her child again, gently brushing a finger across the small hand. "You won't have to hide," she whispered. Her voice carried warmth, but also strength. "You'll grow up knowing exactly who you are." The baby shifted slightly, then settled again. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the past. Not the people who had walked away. Not the things that had gone wrong. Only what was ahead. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, her life continued to grow into something stable and full. Her child began to laugh more, filling the house with sound that made everything feel lighter. Her work continued to succeed, not because she pushed hard, but because she led wisely. And most importantly, she felt at peace. There were no more doubts, no more questions about whether she had made the right choices. She knew she had. One quiet morning, as she walked through the garden with her child in her arms, she paused for a moment and looked around. Everything was calm. Everything was steady. Everything was hers. Not given, not taken, built. She smiled softly. Not a loud, proud smile, just a quiet one. The kind that comes from knowing you don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. In another part of the city, her ex-husband stood alone near a window, looking out at a world that had moved on without him. He thought about her sometimes, about the way she had walked away without looking back, about the strength she had shown without raising her voice, and about the life he could have had if he had made a different choice. But regret, no matter how strong, could not change the past, and he knew that, back in her world. She continued forward, not looking back, not holding on to anything that no longer belonged in her life. She had lost a marriage, but she had found something far more important, herself. And as she held her child close, stepping into another peaceful day, it was clear this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a life she truly deserved.